The archives of the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology hold a fragment of unfired clay cataloged as CBM 13532. This artifact was discovered during excavations of the ancient Sumerian city of Nippur, approximately 100 miles south of modern-day Baghdad. The physical dimensions of this object are just 2.8 inches tall and 2.1 inches wide. Its surface bears a cuneiform inscription that predates the earliest biblical manuscripts by nearly 1,500 years. If you hold this piece of clay in your hands, you will feel the weight of humanity's oldest recorded history. The text on this small tablet contains a detailed description of a global catastrophe and the salvation of a single person. Researchers date this artifact to the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, when Nippur was a thriving metropolis. The clay has preserved the marks of the scribe's tool, which methodically recorded the events of the ancient world for future generations. It is important to understand that this is not a copy of a later text, but the physical original from that distant era. The words imprinted on the surface of this small object describe the conflict between the creators of humanity. It is this conflict that forms the foundation for understanding our most famous religious narratives. In Greek mythology, this same structural conflict is represented through the confrontation between Prometheus and Zeus. Prometheus creates humans, gives them the fire of knowledge, and protects them from the wrath of the supreme god. Zeus, like the Sumerian Enlil, wishes to destroy the human race and sends various trials upon them. In the ancient Indian Vedas, we find a similar split between two groups of powerful beings, the Asuras and the Devas. One group fights for control over the cosmic order, while the other often sides with humanity. All these ancient traditions preserve the same basic narrative of a divided divine rule. One god or faction acts as the creator and protector of the human race. Another god assumes the role of a strict administrator, ready to destroy the population if the rules are broken. Tablet CBM 13532 does not tell us an abstract tale of the good and evil origins of the universe. It records the specific names, motives, and actions of the beings who made decisions about the fate of our ancestors. And these decisions were dictated exclusively by their internal political and familial disputes. The geography of this ancient conflict spans the territory of Mesopotamia, where the climate was harsh and unpredictable. Cities were built of mud bricks on plains prone to frequent flooding by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. We are accustomed to viewing each religion as an isolated cultural phenomenon that arose in a vacuum. However, artifacts such as the Nippur tablet force us to reconsider this isolated approach to history. They offer us a single source code that was later adapted by different civilizations to suit their needs. If we strip away the cultural layers, what remains is a pure chronicle of the confrontation between two powerful figures over control of humanity. Let's turn to the official data and see how academic science explains this striking coincidence. Modern academic science offers a clear and consistent explanation for the similarities between these ancient texts. This interpretation is well-founded, as it is based on decades of meticulous archaeological and linguistic research. According to the mainstream view, the myth of a global flood reflects local natural disasters in Mesopotamia. River flooding could inundate vast areas, which to the local population appeared to be the end of the world. Over time, oral traditions about these floods became embellished with mythological details and divine intervention. The division of roles between Enki and Enlil is explained as the personification of natural elements, creative and destructive water. Anthropologists also point to the natural process of cultural exchange between neighboring civilizations of the ancient world. Trade routes passing through the Middle East facilitated not only the exchange of goods, but also the spread of ideas. Nomadic tribes adopted popular stories from the Sumerians and Babylonians, adapting them to their own pantheons. This is precisely how, according to scholars, the Babylonian epic was transformed into the biblical story of Noah. Later, this same motif migrated to Greece and India, changing the names of the heroes but retaining the basic structure. This academic model is logical and provides a good explanation for how information was transmitted in ancient times. It is based on verifiable facts regarding population migration and the evolution of cuneiform writing systems. Researchers have done a tremendous amount of work tracing how Sumerian words were gradually replaced by Akkadian and ancient Hebrew equivalents. However, this elegant theory fails to explain one key aspect present in the earliest layers of the text. It does not explain why the gods are described not as metaphors for natural forces, but as beings with specific physiology. The texts constantly emphasize their need for food, physical labor, and the use of complex equipment. Mainstream scholarship asserts that polytheism preceded monotheism in the natural evolution of religion, but early Mesopotamian texts reveal the opposite process, a gradual concentration of power in a single figure. Initially, Enki and Enlil share authority within a complex administrative hierarchy of checks and balances. Over time, as later Babylonian adaptations show, the functions of various gods merge. Ultimately, the biblical text merges both brothers into a single figure of God, creating logical paradoxes. The same God in the book of Genesis first regrets creating humans and then decides to save them. This paradox is easily resolved if we acknowledge that we are reading an edited version of the record of the actions of two different entities. The academic community often turns a blind eye to these inconsistencies, preferring to preserve the integrity of the evolutionary model of religion. Researchers' focus shifts to linguistic analysis, setting aside the literal meaning of the words being translated. Thus, the original context of a family feud is replaced by a convenient narrative about the spiritual development of ancient humans. But physical artifacts continue to lie in museum storage, offering a completely different picture of the past. This archive covers events that took place thousands of years before the first lines of the Bible were written. At the heart of this archive lies the conflict between two brothers whose decisions shaped our world. We begin with the most detailed account of the creation of humanity and the reasons behind this great enmity. On display in the halls of the British Museum in London is a collection of clay tablets known collectively as the Atraxasis Epic. The most complete version of this text, catalogued as BM 78941, dates to the 17th century BCE. This document was found during excavations of ancient Sippar and transported to England in the late 19th century. The tablet is a massive clay block about 7 inches high with densely written text. It contains a detailed account of the events preceding the creation of humanity and the subsequent flood. Mainstream scholarship regards the Epic of Atrahasis as a classic example of ancient Near Eastern creation mythology. This view is logical, as the text employs poetic devices and describes the interaction of supernatural forces. Scholars rightly classify it as literature reflecting the attempts of early civilizations to explain their origins. However, there is one obvious flaw in this literary classification that stands out upon careful reading. The text describes the creation of humanity not as a magical act, but as a complex bioengineering procedure. The gods face a rebellion by the lower class of workers and are forced to seek a technological solution to the labor shortage. According to the text, before humans appeared, a group of lesser gods called the Agigi performed hard physical labor on Earth. They were engaged in dredging riverbeds and mining minerals for many centuries. This grueling labor led to a strike. The Igigi burned their tools and surrounded the residence of the Supreme Administrator Enlil. Enlil, in a panic, convenes an emergency meeting of the great gods to suppress this unprecedented rebellion. It is at this council that his brother Enki proposes an alternative solution to create a primitive worker who will take on the burden of labor. This explanation systematically closes all questions of academic science before they can be deeply analyzed. It is also applied universally, as a way to never ask whether the ancients' claims are true. By equating descriptions of epidemics and droughts with metaphors, historians ignore the bureaucratic precision of these reports. The Epic of Atrahasis contains precise time intervals between each catastrophe, amounting to exactly 1,200 years. Such mathematical regularity points to planned cycles of population reduction rather than random natural disasters. The epic culminates in Enlil's final decision to employ a radical measure, a global flood. He compels all the great gods to take an oath of silence so that no one can warn the people. Enki formally observes the oath but finds a way to convey the information to Atrahasis through the reed wall of his hut. Tablet BM 78941 remains physical proof that the creation story was not monotheistic. It lies in the archives of the British Museum as a witness to the ancient bureaucracy that ruled our planet. Translations of its lines are available to anyone willing to read them without theological bias. The document describes not a divine revelation, but crisis management within the ruling family that spiraled out of control. But the Epic of Atrahasis is only the first piece of the puzzle, describing the beginning of this global conflict. The collection of the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Philadelphia contains another critically important document. It is a fragment of a clay tablet found during excavations in Iraq. The document, known as the Eridu Genesis, is cataloged under the number CBS 10673 and dates to approximately the 16th century BCE. The tablet is modest in size, about 3.5 inches tall, but its content radically shifts our perspective. This text focuses not on the creation of humankind, but on the founding of the first cities and the distribution of power. Traditional historiography views the Eridu Genesis as a mythological justification for royal authority in ancient Sumer. This position has solid grounds, as the text describes the transfer of governing institutions from heaven to earth. Scholars rightly note that ancient rulers needed divine legitimization of their status before the populace. However, the official interpretation overlooks the specific details of the physical process of this transfer of power. The text describes not a spiritual blessing, but the transfer of specific instruments of governance called me. These objects are described as physical data carriers containing programs for the functioning of civilization. According to the text, Eridu was the first city on Earth, founded by the god Enki in southern Mesopotamia. Enki created this city as a forward base, independent of Enlil's central command in Nippur. The description of the salvation in the Eridu Genesis emphasizes the technological, rather than magical, nature of the events. Ziusudra receives from Enki not merely a warning, but specific instructions on navigation and the preservation of genetic material. The text explicitly states, "Listen to my words, pay attention to my instructions. A mighty storm will strike the centers of worship." After the catastrophe ends, it is Ziusudra who steps out of the vessel and offers sacrifices to appease the wrathful Enlil. Enlil, upon seeing the survivors, flies into a rage, demanding punishment for whoever disobeyed his direct order. This moment of conflict is key to understanding how the brothers divided their spheres of influence after the flood. Enki takes responsibility for saving humanity and offers Enlil a compromise. He agrees to limit the length of human life and introduce natural mechanisms for population control. In exchange, Enlil recognizes humanity's right to exist and allows them to rebuild their civilization. This agreement between the brothers became the foundation for all subsequent conceptions of covenants between God and humankind. The biblical rainbow after the flood is a later poetic reinterpretation of this harsh political agreement. Tablet CBS 10673 is not merely a fragment of ancient literature, but a legal document concerning rights to the earth. It records a precedent in which one party attempted to destroy property while the other defended its investments. The use of the term investment here is not a metaphor. Humans produce the resources necessary to sustain the gods' lives. Enki was defending his workforce and infrastructure, into which he had invested centuries of engineering effort. Enlil, meanwhile, was attempting a radical restructuring, sacrificing resources to restore absolute control. We were a byproduct of an internal corporate conflict, tools in a protracted war between two brothers. This war did not end after the flood. It merely entered a new, more covert phase. And to see this phase, we must examine the most famous tablet from the archives of Ashurbanipal. In the 19th century, archaeologist Ormuzd Rassam made a discovery that forever changed our understanding of biblical history. In the ruins of Nineveh, about 250 miles north of Babylon, he found the library of King Ashurbanipal. Among the thousands of fragments was a tablet that is now housed in the British Museum under the number K.3375. This is the famous 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, measuring about 6 inches high and 5.2 inches wide. It was on this piece of baked clay that the world first read the original version of the flood myth. The official scientific position is that this tablet is Mesopotamia's greatest literary masterpiece. This assessment is entirely justified, given the text's poetic power and its philosophical depth regarding mortality. Literary historians rightly consider the Epic of Gilgamesh to be the first great work of world culture. But behind the admiration for the epic's literary merits lies a stubborn reluctance to acknowledge its technical and historical anomalies. The text of the 11th tablet contains such precise navigational and engineering details that they cannot simply be poetry. The narrator, Utnapishtim, describes the catastrophe from an eyewitness perspective, using meticulous precision in numbers and dates. Utnapishtim is the Akkadian name for Ziusudra from the Genesis of Eridu, and he once again communicates with Enki, who is referred to here as Ea. The conflict with Enlil unfolds according to a familiar scenario, but with far greater tactical detail. Ea warns Utnapishtim of the secret decision of the Council of Gods and orders him to dismantle his house. Utnapishtim must use the wood to build a vessel measuring 120 by 120 by 120 feet. This cubic vessel, covering an area of 1 acre, is completely unsuitable for sailing, but ideal for surviving a tsunami. After the storm ends, Utnapishtim's vessel comes to rest against Mount Nazir, and he releases birds to scout the land. This episode is copied verbatim into the story of Noah, including the use of a dove and a raven. When Utnapishtim goes out and prepares food, the gods swarm like flies over a sacrifice as they had been deprived of provisions. This humiliating episode for the gods reveals their direct dependence on human agriculture and sacrifices. Enlil arrives last and flies into an uncontrollable rage upon discovering that someone has survived. He demands an answer from the council. No one was supposed to survive this destruction. Who betrayed the secret? Enki openly takes responsibility, delivering a speech that marks the climax of their political confrontation. He accuses Enlil of disproportionate use of force. Lay the sin upon the sinner, but do not destroy everyone. The British Museum houses this artifact in Gallery 55, where anyone can see it with their own eyes. The cuneiform characters on tablet K.3375 are stamped by the firm hand of a scribe who transcribed an ancient and immutable fact. The text does not attempt to be an allegory. It chronicles survival during a war of annihilation. The war between the brothers Enki and Enlil determined whether we would exist as an independent species, and evidence of this monumental conflict is scattered not only across Mesopotamia, but throughout the ancient world. The University of Oxford Library houses the oldest manuscript of Hesiod's Theogony, dating from the 10th century CE. The text itself was composed in Greece around 700 BCE, based on much older oral traditions. Although this document is written on parchment rather than clay, its structural framework is identical to that of the Sumerian tablets. At the center of the narrative is the Titan Prometheus, whose name literally translates as the Foreseer. His main adversary is Zeus, the supreme ruler of Olympus, who controls lightning and weather phenomena. Academic tradition views the similarities between Greek and Mesopotamian mythology as the result of the diffusion of ideas along trade routes. This hypothesis is entirely logical, since merchants and travelers did indeed pass stories from port to port. The Hellenistic world actively absorbed elements of Eastern cultures, adapting them to its own polis-based thinking. Zeus's reaction to the violation of his embargo strikingly resembles Enlil's outbursts of anger at Sumerian assemblies. Zeus cannot simply kill Prometheus, since the Titan belongs to the highest echelon of immortal rulers. Instead, he sentences him to severe physical punishment, being chained to a rock in the Caucasus. Interestingly, in some Sumerian texts, Enki is also subjected to ostracism and temporary isolation for his actions. At the same time, Zeus sends a flood upon humanity to complete his plan to purge the land of its unwanted population. And once again, we see the familiar scenario of salvation through the secret transmission of information to a single chosen individual. Prometheus warns his son Deucalion of the impending catastrophe and orders him to build a wooden chest. Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha spend 9 days in this chest while the waters flood the Greek lands. After the flood ends, they offer a sacrifice to Zeus, who, like Enlil, accepts the fait accompli of human survival. The structural framework of these events is not merely similar, it is the exact same sequence of events, step for step. The difference lies only in the geographical names and the translations of names from Akkadian into ancient Greek. The Vedic flood myth describes King Manu, who is warned of the catastrophe by a deity in the form of a giant fish. This fish is an avatar of Vishnu, the preserver god, who takes upon himself the task of saving life on Earth. The fish orders Manu to build a ship and gather the seeds of all plants to restore the biosphere after the catastrophe. The association of the savior with the element of water points directly to Enki, who was the lord of the world's fresh waters. Thus, from Iraq to Greece and India, we trace the same administrative conflict. One ruler controls the atmosphere and demands destruction. Another controls the water and organizes a secret rescue operation. We have examined physical artifacts held in museum collections on 3 different continents. Each of these objects has been translated, verified, and cataloged by leading experts in ancient languages. Texts from Nippur, Sippur, and Nineveh form a continuous documentary chain describing the same sequence of events. We see not the development of disparate religious fantasies, but a sequential account of a global administrative crisis. The details of this crisis recur with frightening precision, ignoring cultural boundaries and millennia of rewriting. The creation of humanity as a bioengineering solution to a labor shortage is documented in the Epic of Atrahasis. The division of powers among factions of gods and the struggle for control over me technologies is documented in the Genesis of Eridu. The Supreme Council's decision to destroy the human population using weapons and weather anomalies is documented on Tablet 11. The secret operation to preserve genetic material and save a select group of people, documented in all three sources. There is no satisfactory academic explanation for why all these documents point in the same direction. Coincidences of this level of detail in forensic science are considered irrefutable evidence of a single source of events. Official science asks us to believe that ancient scribes accidentally invented identical bureaucratic procedures. We are asked to consider the precise dimensions of the rescue vessel in feet and acres as the result of poetic inspiration. We are being asked to turn a blind eye to the fact that the gods in these texts possess physical bodies, have needs, and use technology. And most importantly, we are being asked to ignore the fact that the Bible simply merged two different leaders into a single God. This merger of Enki and Enlil has sparked thousands of years of theological debate about why God is so cruel in the Old Testament. It is important to understand that neither of the brothers was perfect by our modern standards of morality. Enki saved people not because he was a saint, but because we were his intellectual property. This is how the institutions of monarchy and the priesthood arose, which continued to exploit people without the direct intervention of their creators. The war between the factions entered a covert phase, where people killed one another in the name of various invisible patrons. The division of languages during the construction of the Tower of Babel was yet another tactical operation by Enlil to weaken a united humanity. Every new empire in the Middle East rewrote ancient texts to exalt its own specific god. The Babylonians elevated Marduk, son of Enki, making him the supreme ruler of the universe in the Enuma Elish epic. The Assyrians replaced Marduk with their national god Ashur, copying the very same ancient narratives. At the beginning of our investigation, we held in our hands a small piece of unfired clay from the University of Pennsylvania. Tablet CBM 13532, found in the ruins of Nippur, seemed to be merely a tiny fragment of ancient and forgotten mythology. But now, we see that this is not just a myth, but a surviving fragment of a grand historical archive. This archive spans the entire planet, from the cuneiform libraries of Nineveh to Greek manuscripts and the Indian Vedas. And all these documents tell the same continuous story of our origins. The history of humanity did not begin in the Garden of Eden with a talking serpent and a magical fruit. It began in the bioengineering laboratories of Bit Shimti, where a group of managers was trying to solve a labor shortage. We survived not because of divine mercy, but because of the political sabotage of one of those managers. Enki defied the orders of his commander-in-chief, Enlil, by giving us instructions on how to build an airtight shelter. This disobedience cost him his reputation and turned him into the chief villain in later religious texts. And the cruel administrator who demanded our genocide was, paradoxically, elevated to the status of a loving father. Imagine for a moment that every word in the Epic of Atrahasis and the Genesis of Eridu is literally true. Imagine that Utnapishtim's ship was indeed 1 acre in area and was coated with bitumen to make it airtight. This means that somewhere beneath the thick layer of silt in the Middle East lie the remnants of advanced technologies. This means that our planet was long a colony governed by a rigid corporate hierarchy of aliens, and this radically changes our attitude toward ourselves. We are not an accident of evolution, but a valuable asset. Those who control the past inevitably control our understanding of our own future. For millennia, religious institutions have concealed this primordial schism, offering us a simplified picture of the world. They demanded faith instead of knowledge, obedience instead of questions, and fear instead of intellectual curiosity. But Enki's knowledge, passed down to us on Eridu, was intended precisely so that we would ask questions. The ability to read these tablets, analyze the data, and question dogma is our greatest legacy. We have come a long way from the first cities of Mesopotamia to the era of spaceflight and genetic engineering. Today, we ourselves stand on the threshold of creating artificial intelligence and modifying our own biology. We are approaching the level of technological development possessed by the Igigi and the Anunnaki of the ancient texts. And as we advance, texts that once seemed like myths suddenly begin to read like technical manuals. What was magic to the Bronze Age nomads becomes understandable engineering to modern humans. Perhaps right now, for the first time in history, we are capable of correctly understanding what was left for us in Nippur. We began this journey with a single small artifact that raised colossal questions about our reality. Etched forever on its clay surface are the names of beings who determined the fates of entire civilizations. Every day, the light from museum lamps falls on cuneiform signs that are 1,500 years older than the Bible. What began as a family dispute ultimately became the foundation of our civilization. Tablet CBM 13532 lies in a glass display case at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, and this fact is indisputable.